So now I want to go back to book one, and I want to talk a little bit more about Satan. He's been revolving around all of our discussions, but let's kind of go back to the beginning and figure out, okay, what is the question and who is this figure? So the big question, as I said, is Satan really the hero of this work? And are we as readers meant to sympathize with Satan, to see Satan as embodying a type of virtue of resoluteness, of single-mindedness, of spirited revolt against tyranny that we're supposed to copy? So some people believe that. I don't think that's what's going on in this poem, but some people firmly believe that. Or on the other hand, as I said, something I would probably see as probably a more cogent reading of the poem. Are we to see Satan as kind of a negative example, a warning for us? This is where your pride can get you. It may look tempting now, but wait till the end of the poem. Okay, so a lot of the emphases on Satan as a hero really focus on books 1 and 2, which we'll be looking at because they're, the exciting opening. It's where we see Satan, but he has towards the end of the poem, it's a much less glamorous appearance. Okay, so it was a problem for early readers as well, not just us. So let's where does this figure come from, and what did Milton have to access in terms of his own writing of Satan? Because in a way, Satan before Milton is quite a bit different. After Milton, our imagination about what Satan is quite a bit different. It's quite a bit more dynamic, but this is what he was working with, at least. So the word devil, English word devil, as you can see, I won't go through all that, but has a certain etymology from Greek diabolos, which is a translation of the Hebrew shatan, or Satan, which is adversary or obstructor. Okay, so it's originally had just this kind of very general sense in the Hebrew Bible, and the early references were to someone who kind of either prompts evil or opposes God's will, because in the earliest writings of the Hebrew Bible, it's before the Hebrew people had adopted a strict monotheism. So there's remnants in the Hebrew Bible of references to a council of gods, where either Elohim or Yahweh, there's different names of this god that they would be worshiping, is one of a member of this council. Okay, so depending on which strands of the tradition that particular text in the Hebrew Bible is picking up on, and then those are edited over generations. So you have different strands of that, and that becomes solidified into more and more of a let's say a distinct figure. So if there's a council of gods and you have a kind of an opposer of humankind as one of the figures in that round table, then that becomes, and maybe with no distinct name, then that comes to have a distinct name. And then then in the intertestamental period, the figure of Satan really started to develop into a kind of concrete figure of evil, so to speak. So the intertestamental period is like the Hebrew Bible, basically up to Malachi, the last of the prophets, and then so there's over a 400-year gap until the first texts of the Christian New Testament. So that's often referred to as the intertestamental period. So in that period, there's other texts and writings that would become deuterocanonical for Roman Catholics, and there's other traditions of interpreting the Hebrew Bible that are developing. And in that period, it was only in that period that the serpent of Genesis, okay, was associated with this figure of Satan. So we had this figure of Satan, which is this general obstructor of humankind. And in this period, they said, well, wonder if that's the same as the serpent that's in Genesis. So let's make them equal, okay? And then in that period, they took this other reference from Isaiah. So Isaiah, written much earlier, a reference to the king of Babylon, and they just called used the word, or Isaiah used the word Lucifer, or son of morning, for this figure, in terms of kind of one warning prophecy that he had. And then he takes that, in the intertestamental period, authors took that figure of Lucifer and attached it to Satan as well. So you start to get these strands pulled together in the intertestamental period that concretize Satan into this figure of evil in the intertestamental period. And it was picked up in early Christianity. Early Christianity had certain, I won't go into it in too much detail, but Gnostic Manichaean strands to it. So that tended towards a kind of strict dualism, so to speak. So for a strict Manichaean view of the world, there's an evil world of matter and a good world of spirit, and we're all divided by this, and they're distinct forces. Okay, so now this is distinct from, let's say, what is kind of an orthodox Christian doctrine, which is, God is all powerful, and evil is in essence the absence of divine will. It's a non-entity, because it's just the being so far removed from divine will that it's an experience of absence. Okay, so it's not as though there's a distinct force out there that could overpower and sometimes beat good, that kind of thing. But that's kind of the Manichaean view, is that there's two opposed forces, and evil will win sometimes. Now, so because early Christianity had that kind of Gnostic Manichaean influence, it really picked up this notion of Satan as this kind of, in the mythology, it picked up this notion of Satan as a kind of a distinct being, as being as representing evil, as being a tempter in the garden, that, like the serpent in the Genesis stories, as being the force that brings evil in the world, so to speak. So that's what Milton's building on, and he builds on that Christian tradition, and he fleshes out, so to speak, that's all he has really to go on. So everything about him having great speeches, and there were some post New Testament stories about, about maybe a battle in heaven and fallen angels, and some extrapolations on that. But really, this whole story about having great speeches and rousing these different devils, that's all created by Milton. So it's kind of a mental imagery of Satan that he's created. Now, the other thing that he created around that is making Satan this attractive leader, so to speak. So I want you to think about when we first see Aeneas in the Aeneid. Okay, so he's his comrades' ships, some are lost, they've been through a terrible storm. It looks like they've lost half their ships. It looks like they're not going to be able to get to Italy. They have no idea where they are. He gives a rousing speech to kind of bring up their spirits and say, we've been through worse. We battled the Greeks. We did that. We can do this too. And I forget what the narrator says. I'll try to find a note on it, but the narrator undercuts that by saying, this was what he was saying on the outside, but on the inside, he was also despairing. So he puts on a brave face, okay, in order to rouse the troops. So too, and I want to turn to that now, so too does Satan in his first speech, and it's just after, I think, where we left off last time. Oh yeah, so I found a note here. So the narrator in Virgil's Aeneid, so after Aeneas has aroused the troops there, the narrator says, brave words, sick with mounting cares, he assumes a look of hope and keeps his anguish buried in his heart. Okay, so here that's very clear that that's heroic. Okay, that's heroic in Virgil's Aeneid. That action of putting aside personal pain and assuming that personal pain in order to, you know, Aeneas is the pious one, the man of duty. He knows this is his duty. He's not going to wallow in his own misery and complain. He's going to swallow that. And Aeneas has a duty to lead those men and ensure for their safety. Now, is that what's happening with Satan? I wonder. So Satan's first speech, very similar situation. We'll turn to that now. I'll stop sharing this and I'll share the view of the text. So we had read up to where his speech starts. So we had read last time this invocation of man's first disobedience, that first part up to, and justify the ways of God to men. So remember that famous line 26. And then say first, for heaven hides nothing from thy view. So say first what caused this fall, and it was Satan, and he fell 9 times the space that measures night and day. So they fell for 9 days. And they're on a burning lake, and next to him was Beelzebub, to whom the archenemy and thence in heaven called Satan, with bold words breaking the horrid silence began. So now these are words of Satan. Okay, so Satan's first speech. So very similar situation to Aeneas. The crew's undergone hardship. It's quite a desperate situation. First speech. If thou beest he, but oh, how fallen, how changed from him who in the happy realms of light, clothed with transcendent brightness, didst outshine myriads though bright. If he who mutual league, united thoughts and counsels, equal hope and hazard in the glorious enterprise, joined with me once, now misery hath joined in equal ruin. Into what pit thou seest, from what height fallen, so much the stronger proved he with his thunder. Until then, who knew the force of those dire arms? Yet not for those, nor for what the potent victor in his rage can else inflict, do I repent or change. Though changed in outward luster, that fixed mind and high disdain from sense of injured merit, that with the mightiest raised me to contend, and to the fierce contention brought along innumerable forces of spirits armed, that durst dislike his reign, and me preferring his utmost power with adverse power opposed, in dubious battle on the plains of heaven, and shook his throne. What though the field be lost? All is not lost. The unconquerable will, the study of revenge, immortal hate, and courage never to submit or yield. And what is else not to be overcome? That glory never shall his wrath or might extort from me, to bow and sue for grace with suppliant knee and deify his power, who from the terror of this arm so late doubted his empire. That were low indeed. That were an ignominy and shame beneath this downfall. Since by fate the strength of gods in this imperial substance cannot fail, since through experience of this great event in arms not worse, in foresight much advanced, we may with more successful hope resolve to wage by force or guile eternal war, irreconcilable to our grand foe, who now triumphs and in the excess of joy, sole reigning, holds the tyranny in heaven. So that's the end of his first speech. And then the narrator comes. Remember the narrator's little kind of tag on to Aeneas's first speech. So here, so spake the apostate angel, though in pain, vaunting loud, but racked with deep despair. Okay, so so that could be taken two ways, right? So again, that can be taken as heroic, like Aeneas, in swallowing his pain in order to try to put on a brave face for the team, so to speak. Okay, that's one. And then the other could be he's vaunting aloud, but he's not getting anywhere. He's racked with deep despair. These are all lies. This is part of the lies that is Satan, and the lack of logic that is Satan. Okay, so we'll go back and to some of the speech. So he asks, if thou beest he, but oh how fallen. So the outward luster of Beelzebub so different than when he was in heaven. So you can hardly recognize him. Uh, how changed from him who in the happy realms of light, clothed with transcendent brightness, didst outshine. So even in that happy realm of light in heaven, you, Beelzebub, did outshine myriads, so many, even though they were bright. If we who mutual league united thoughts and counsels, equal hope and hazard in glorious enterprise. So if we who were in that mutual league and had hope and joined once with me in that hope, now miseries joined us together in equal ruin. Okay, so at first it's not very rousing speech. You really took it on the chin. You're totally disfigured now. We were first united in equal hope, and you were united with me behind that, but now we're only united in equal ruin. It totally went to hell, literally. Into what pit thou seest from what height fallen, so much the stronger proved he with his thunder. So we fell from such a great height, and now we're in such a deep pit. He proved so much stronger, he with his thunder. So God and the Son, we find out in the war in book 6, there's a description of the war in heaven, and it's really the Son that wields this thunder. Until then, who knew the force of those dire arms? Okay, so who knew until then? So, but you didn't, like, here's the logic, right? So that can be tempting, this rhetoric. We can get sucked into the satanic rhetoric of, oh, he's really trying, and maybe, God's just a tyrant and kind of tempted their attempt, as Satan tries to say. But it's not as though someone, if someone has relationship to God, knows they're omnipotent, they don't have to have an arm wrestle with them to figure out that they're going to lose, right? Who knew the force of those dire arms? Well, he's omnipotent. Yet not for those, nor for the potent victor in his rage can else inflict, nor what the potent victor in his rage can else inflict, do I repent or change. So not because of those dire arms, so those forceful arms, nor what else the potent, so powerful victor, God, can else inflict, not for that or for whatever else he's going to put us through, do I repent or change. So Satan is unrepentant still. He's not going to change. And here's another aspect that has a certain resonance for the people who are defenders of Satan, is that Satan is the one who represents a character of strength of will. I'm not going to change. I'm one of resolve. I have a will of resolve. Okay. I'm not going to be affected by external blows. I'm going to kind of marshal through. Though changed in outward luster, that fixed mind and high disdain from sense of injured merit. So the mind is its own place and can make a heaven of hell, he says later, can make a heaven of hell and a hell of heaven, or it could be the other way around. I always forget. So the power of the mind to create its own place and space is also very satanic, and it's something you'd also hear from Hamlet. Actually, it's this sense of the infinite capacity of one's kind of mental faculty and mental resolve. that with the mightiest raised me to contend, and to the fierce contention brought along innumerable force of spirits. So there's all of that, that sense of injured merit and that fixed resolve of that mental resolve that brought me to contend with my infinite or innumerable spirits that were on my side against omnipotent God. And those other spirits, the other fallen angels, durst dislike his reign, and me preferring. So they disliked God's reign and preferred Satan. His utmost power with adverse power opposed in dubious battle. So dubious battle there can mean, has a couple of senses. It's kind of like vain. Remember, we talked about vain having two senses. So vain means, it's useless, but also it's self-centered or prideful. Here, dubious can mean the sense that we have of dubious, that it is of doubtful importance, let's say, but also here of doubtful outcome. So here, dubious, Satan, I think, wants to say something like, it was close. So before he was saying, well, who knew how powerful he was? Like who could have overcome those? It's just incredible. And then, yeah, well, we were close, another shot. I think we could have had it. And these are the kind of machinations and twists and turns of thinking that will get the fallen angels to decide that they want to go another round, but just on a different arena. Okay. On the plains of heaven, and shook his throne. What though the field be lost? All's not lost. The unconquerable will, the study of revenge, immortal hate. So even though we lost that field, all's not lost. We still have our unconquerable will. We have the study of revenge. We can keep feeding on revenge. Now, if there's one thing in my limited experience I know that is a recipe for a miserable existence, is to focus on resentment and revenge as a goal. Okay, I don't know. I don't really know that from a lot of personal experience. I'm not a vengeful person, but you get those times where you're bitter at someone or something like that. Now, feeding oneself on vengefulness, even if it's the petty vengefulness that of someone who's cut you off, so you don't want to let them in on the next merge or something like that. If you're on the freeway, that's the kind of bitterness that will never bring happiness to one's soul. So Satan that's what Satan brings to someone, is this focusing on vengefulness and my injured merit. It's pride centered. So it's, first of all, it's pride. It's pride that I deserved more. I did, and they didn't do that. So go get them. That is, as I said, a recipe for the kind of hellish existence that Satan is in. And that's the kind of existence, I think, is not just Milton, but every writer who writes against pride and against being resentful will tell you leads human existence to that kind of hell. The immortal hate and courage never to submit or yield. And what else, and what is else not to be overcome? That glory shall never his wrath or might extort from me. Okay, so he's never going to be able to extort the glory from me of capitulation. He's never going to be able to get the glory of truly defeating me. Okay, because I'm always going to keep going. That's what Satan's saying. To bow and sue for grace, with suppliant me and deify his power. So I would never bow. It would be beneath me to sue for grace, like to sue for forgiveness or for the gift of grace. Who from the terror of this arm so late? So before it was the dire arms, and who knew how powerful the omnipotent's dire arms were? And wow, that, we really got our butts kicked, and who knew how powerful he was? That was the opening. And now it's gone to, just through his own kind of internal machination, Satan's led to, I would never bend my knee to that. Why would I ever do that? That would be beneath me. And why would I do it to someone who, from the terror of this arms so late doubted his empire. So the terror of these arms so recently doubted or feared for the outcome of his empire. Okay, so he went from dubious to, it was questionable about what outcome. That's in his mind, right? I think underneath that there's question of that was like, it was dubious in the sense that it was not worth it, right? Here now it's to God was so close, he doubted, he feared that he was going to lose his empire in heaven. That were low indeed. That were an ignominy and shame beneath this downfall. So it'd be so shameful. It would be a shame beneath this downfall. So it'd be worse than sitting in this fiery lake. It would be worse than this shame. So again, pride doesn't let that happen, right? So the person sitting in a burning lake, looking at an eternity of burning in this lake, right? So this is, obviously, let's say a mythical kind of literal implantation of a psychological state that we can all be in if we're fallen, let's say, as opposed to living, let's say, trying to free ourselves from pride, from resentment, okay? These types of things. So if one is afraid of shame, okay, so if I can say psychologically, I don't want the shame that would come with saying, I'm sorry, I repent, to whoever it is, whether it's to one's God or to one's spouse or something like that, then they're going to live, let's say, the psychological equivalent of, kind of a burning lake of misery for a long time, basically. But here it's literal, it's been literalized to the extreme, right? So the person literally is, so Satan literally is in a burning lake. And the prospect is that would be experienced forever. And still, it's a shame beneath this, okay? That would be a shame beneath this downfall. So it'd be worse than this downfall. So, well, maybe not, since by fate the strength of gods and this imperial substance cannot fail. So since we have strength of gods, like we're angels, and that our imperial substance or our heaven-like substance cannot decay or fail, like we're going to be around. It's kind of like a Marvel action movie, they can get totally destroyed, but they're just gonna dust off the dust again and stand up. Because of this, and since through the experience of this great event, in arms not worse, in foresight much to advance. So, and we've gained experience. So we've got the strength of gods. Our substance will not decay. We have a heavenly substance. We've had the experience of trying it twice, we're once already. So we've already tried it. So we've gained experience. And in that experience, we didn't lose any arms. Like we're all still around. We have our weapons, but we gained foresight. So we know what to try and how to probe differently next time. We may with more successful hope resolve to wage by force or guile eternal war, irreconcilable. So we can, with all those things, we know we can try with more successful hope to wage war by force or guile. So by open war or by trying deception and more covert methods. Now, I'm assuming that the note, like eternal war, he's saying it's hopeful, like we're hopeful of success, okay? But eternal war kind of means like, is this going to go forever? Like the war on terror, is that going to just be forever? So eternal war to, oops. I'm just going to, I think I lost. Sorry about this. I just lost my, there we go. So eternal war is to be implicitly doubtful about the prospects of victory. Yeah, so that's my point about that notion of eternal war. Irreconcilable to our grand foe, who now triumphs and in the excess of joy, sole reigning, holds the tyranny of heaven. So again, tyranny, we could take that as Milton's cue to us that Satan is a Republican hero against a tyrannical God, so to speak. But again, the perspective of Satan on these things is questionable. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation, and I'll just so let's see. So this is the speech we just read, 84 to 127. I won't go through all these, okay? We won't have time for that. But this is the kind of thing, like I've highlighted some of the things you might want to look at in terms of sections, and we won't have time to go through together every one of these speeches. There's too much there, but you get an idea of, if you were to go by yourself, some of the things to think about, okay? And some of the ways to read it, okay? We can see that one of the things I want you to get from reading the poem is the sense of our perspective on Satan. So our early impression is that Satan is awe-inspiring. He's depicted in the sense of his say his gigantic size, remember we looked at that simile, he's compared to Leviathan, the hugest of the ocean. And then later, we didn't read it, but when he gets up, he puts his spear on the ground to stabilize his steps on the burning marl of the ground. And his spear is larger than, it makes the largest Norway pine seem like a toothpick. So it's unimaginably big, right? So this is our perspective on Satan. If we approach from a fallen perspective. So we see him later as he goes into pandemonium. So just kind of, I'll quickly recap what happens in book one. Is book one, we have those first speeches on the burning lake. After the invocation, Satan and Beelzebub, Satan says, okay, well, look, it looks like the firing hail that was being sent from heaven has died down for a second. Let's try to profit of this occasion to get off the burning lake and get over to that ground over there, and let's rouse the troops. Let's get them off of the burning lake. So, and then they decide, let's try to council. Let's have a council. Let's have a parliament of sorts to try to figure out what our best course of action is. So they build what's called pandemonium. This is this great hall in hell where their discourses are going to be held. And the rest of book one is well, that's where book one ends. Book 1-2 opens with this council in hell, pandemonium, where we have different discussions of courses of action. Okay, so as they're going into pandemonium, they have to shrink to the size of bees. Okay, so in order to get into this building, even though it's a grand hall, there's so many of them, they get to the size of like bees to get into these passages and all fit in. Now, so again, it's a question of our perspective. Now they seem big, okay, now, but from a different perspective, they can seem small and insignificant. Okay, another point I want to make on that is the course of Satan throughout. He starts this noble leader Aeneas, like with this rousing speech that everyone responds to. His rhetoric is appealing. He's depicted as this martial hero with the spear and the shield. He then progressively changes to an eagle to first enter paradise or Eden, then a serpent, and then finally at the end he's a serpent and can't change back. And when he goes, so I think this is in book 10. In book 10, when he goes back to hell to say, look, everybody, I did it. What we said, go and conquer the new world and destroy humankind and tempt them to evil. That's exactly what I did. It was awesome. I just did it. They're all evil. We control that place. I just created a bridge so that sin and death can go over there, and they're going to be going back and forth all the time. So we did it. We won. Touchdown. And all of the fallen angels, like, so he gets, instead of, sorry, let me back up. So instead of the rhetoric that rouses his troops that we see in book one, uh, instead of a million swords going into the air to say hurrah, we have hissing, the sound of a crowd booing and hissing. So they're hissing. He looks to see, and Satan realizes, oh, they're hissing because they've all been changed to snakes as well, and they can't change back. They're all serpents. They're totally under God's control, been turned into serpents as some sort of ironic punishment. Then Satan realizes that he himself is a serpent and can't change out of it. So he goes. The progress is from this martial hero that we see at first, that we have to temper with where he is at the end. Okay, so this is not where the story does not end well for Satan. So 192 to 210 is the simile we looked at last week. I won't go over that again. In addition to his course, Satan's course going downhill, his rhetoric becomes more obviously flawed as you go through. We won't have time to pick those spots out, but do look for it. And again, the slides point to some speeches. And then the other thing I want to point out is, in terms of perspective on Satan, is this question of hope in hell. Hope never comes, that comes to all. So 159, 69. There's also this notion of darkness visible that we talked about. So also think about, let's say, first of all, there's no hope in hell. Okay, so that's an important part of what is hell. Despair is hell. Okay, and again, think about this as, it's a myth, so it's operating like an epic, with characters that we're supposed to in some ways take as literal characters that are moving, like Satan is literal character that's going and doing things and battling or not battling, but also as almost an allegory for our psyche, right? So if we are in hell, it's one way in which that manifests itself is despair. Now, what is despair is, and we see this in some of Satan's speeches, is this notion that it can never get better. It can only get worse. Being fallen, the experience of being fallen, is to always be falling. Okay, so it's not as though, okay, well, I'll get used to it. Well, it's hot in here, but after a while, like hell's it's toasty in hell. But after, I find, you get kind of used to it. You wear loose clothing. Sometimes there's a fan, you get used to it, So it's not like that. Like, it's going to be worse tomorrow. There's going to be something that's worse. So you especially get that in some of Satan's speeches in book 4, but so watch for that. And then also, that's the experience too, in the opposite direction of being unfallen. So people will also say, heaven must be boring, right? So for the Miltonic imagination, it's not boring, because being unfallen means always to be rising. It's going to get better all the time. So there, it's a question of hope. Okay, so hope, and the other, I think, key message of the poem is love. So hope and love as being these overriding kind of virtues that guide one's actions and aspirations. So thinking the best of others, hoping for the best for others, hoping for the best and knowing that that's having faith in that happening for oneself. That is a unfallen perspective that sees always things getting better, right? So that can be kind of, the way I phrased it can be kind of, let's say, bastardized or simplified into kind of a pessimism versus optimism. And there's something to that, but it also has to do with a fundamental faith in the goodness and a divine will behind things in kind of this Miltonic Christian hope, versus despair as being totally cut off from divine will. Okay. So I'll skip over a couple of these slides that talk about Satan's rhetoric and how powerful it is. As I said, it can be you can see it from a couple of perspectives. And so I think maybe let's turn to this speech if we can very quickly, 242. So this is Satan again. Is this the region, this the soil, the clime? Said then the lost archangel, this the seat that we must change for heaven, this mournful gloom for that celestial light? Be it so, since he who now is sovereign can dispose and bid what shall be right. Farthest from him is best. So farthest from him is best. Whom reason hath equaled, force hath made supreme. So Satan's saying that, okay, is this where what we've had to exchange for heaven? So be it. If to be farthest away from that guy is where we need to be, because if he's sovereign there, we have to find our dwelling as far away from that. Who we have to find our dwelling as far away as possible from someone who our reason equaled, but only his force made supreme. So he's saying that Satan's saying that their reasonings and their reasons for behind their move were equal to any claim he had. So their justifications to rule, so to speak, were as reasonable, as rational as God's claim, but it was only supreme force. So that be the definition of tyranny. It's only a rule of force, not through some sort of legitimacy or rational justification. So this is what Satan's claiming, but we need to again poke holes in Satan's rhetoric, and we need to see how that plays out in other perspectives and in the action. Farewell, happy fields where joy forever dwells. So farewell those happy fields of heaven. Hail, horrors, hail, infernal world. And thou, profoundest hell, receive thy new possessor. So farewell to those joyful fields. Hail the horrors of hell. So his will be to, his decision now is to try to embrace and see, to praise, let us say, that which is farthest from God, and to get a certain pleasure out of hell, so to speak. One who brings, so receive your new possessor, Satan, and the other fallen angels, but Satan always thinks about himself, right? Satan is so self-centered. Its pride is number one, okay? So Satan is pride personified. Pride, resentment, okay? So all the seven sins eventually portray themselves in Satan, but it always starts from there. One who brings a mind not to be changed. So receive thy new possessors, me, Satan. One who brings a mind not to be changed by place or time. So remember, we talked about that kind of resolve of Satan's mind, which can be seen as a romantic, heroic moment of mental resolution and introspection, but can also be seen as pride, really. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. That's a famous line. Okay, so I want to zero in on that. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. I wanted to, for those of you who've read Hamlet, bring back kind of a Hamlet notion there of the powers of the mind. What matter where, if I be still the same, and what I should be, all but less than he whom thunder hath made greater. And what does it matter if I'm still the same, and what I should be, and just less whom the thunder hath made greater? Okay, so again, it was only that force and the thunder that made him better than me. Here at least we shall be free. So freedom is very important to Milton. So is this freedom for Milton? So he's free from, he thinks, first of all, but is he free to be his ultimate, what he should be? Or is this the freedom of the heroin addict? Or is this the freedom of the tomato plant to languish, right? The other thing is not really free. We find out, God's allowing every one of these movements. He's allowing him to heap damnation upon damnation. The narrator says something like, Satan lifted his head and was not able to lift that head had it not been from the divine will allowing it, so to speak. Okay. Let's see. Here at least we shall be free. The Almighty hath not built here for his envy, will not drive us hence. Here we may reign secure, and in my choice to reign is worth ambition, though in hell. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Okay, another famous line. So we'll be safe here. It's not as though God has not created this for his envy. God's not going to want to go and take this back. He's not going to say, "Oh boy, that's a really nice place. I think I want to control hell now too." This is Satan's logic, right? So Satan's logic is, God's just controlling up there. He's going to let us be down here to do whatever we want. He'll not drive us hence. Here we may reign secure. And in my choice, to reign is worth ambition, though in hell. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Okay. What that reminds me of too is, remember famous lines of Achilles in the underworld, in the Odyssey. Better to be, for Achilles had the opposite view, right? He had the view that he would rather serve in the world above than be the ruler of the underworld. Okay, so Satan reverses that, and it's better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Okay, so Achilles had said he would rather be a serf to the lowest person in the realm of the living than be the king of the underworld. Okay, here Satan reverses that kind of epic logic.